You may have noticed that some of y'all's 401ks are 372ks today. And that, of course, is because we're currently in the midst of the first 24 hours of Trump announcing his Liberation Day tariffs. And as expected, we've seen a lot of reactions from people, institutions, companies, and the markets themselves. So to fully understand and appreciate the situation, all get on the same page, we actually have to back up a bit. Because leading into yesterday, there was a bit of speculation about what the tariffs would actually look like. And in the end, it was actually a mix of the two top theories. There was a baseline 10% number across the board, followed by a so-called reciprocal tariff that can increase that number. And those so-called reciprocal tariffs, they allegedly do not just take into account the tariffs that other countries place on American goods, but also what were referred to as currency manipulation and trade barriers. So take China, for example. The Trump administration claims that when accounting for everything, they tax their citizens 67% extra to buy American goods. And so in return, you have Trump saying we're going to charge Americans a 34% tax to import Chinese goods. Vietnam is then a similar story where you have Trump saying that they make American goods 90% more expensive, so we're going to make their stuff 46% more expensive. And in general, you have the Trump administration making it look like we're giving a 50% discount on what other countries are charging us. That is, unless they're the baseline, in which case there's the 10%. And so with that, right off the bat, there was a lot of confusion on how the administration even came up with these numbers. Or with the White House's official Twitter post even getting a community note on it, which read, Trump's, quote, reciprocal tariffs aren't based on actual foreign tariffs, but likely on the US trade deficit divided by imports. See WTO data. Now those numbers, they don't completely add up, but they were very close, leading to speculation that the formula was actually something else, and officially it is. And we know this because yesterday evening, the Office of the United States Trade Representative released this formula with an explanation. Though as it turns out, it just looks more complicated than it actually is, and the big thing is that it is essentially dividing the trade deficits by the imports. So the chi symbol literally just means our total exports to a country, the mu is our total imports, and then on the bottom you have epsilon and phi, which respectively represent the price elasticity of import demand and the elasticity of import prices with respect to tariffs. And it appears they actually set those numbers to 4 and 0.25, which is notable because what is 4 times 1/4? 1, which would make this formula literally just trade deficit versus total imports with more steps, as many have pointed out. And so it appears that the reason the community note was off is because it was using different trade deficit data, but if you use the census.gov 2024's numbers, it's spot on. And so in the China example, you have 295.4 billion deficit and import 438.95 billion, giving us 67%, and then you divide that by 2 and it's 33.5%, which is then rounded up. And it appears that the only time this doesn't hold true is if we have a trade surplus or a country doesn't tax American goods as much, in which case their goods still get hit with a 10% tariff anyways. And regardless, it doesn't actually take into account what other countries are charging us as claimed. Like in the case of China, the WTO claims that the average tariff rate is 7.5%, which, is one of the reasons we saw so many critiques of this. With us even seeing this play out with one of the guys who managed to reverse engineer the formula, getting into a tiff with the deputy White House press secretary. And after revealing the formula, Deputy Secretary Kush Desai responded, no, we literally calculated tariff and non-tariff barriers. With him then getting a helpful community note pointing out that the official formula is essentially equivalent to the original post and includes no terms for the tariff rate charged by the exporting country, which as we've seen and looked over here is true. There are no references to tariff rates, currency manipulation, and trade barriers in the official formula. And so with that, you also had others going on to say, one of the most depressing things about Trump's tariffs is that he constantly lies about them and so many of his followers believe him. No, these tariffs are not half of what they charge us because Trump used a formula disconnected from tariffs and then flat out lied about it. As well as, holy fuck, this is bad. Even Grok is like, the White House's tariff formula is faulty. When saying all that, not everyone is upset with the formula, with, for example, supporters writing, Trump's tariff formula is further evidence he is laser focused on reversing these imbalances. Although I will say, finding people outside of the administration or the just like true ride or dies defending the tariffs, it was a bit hard, right? And with that, if you thought people were worried about how these tariffs were rolled out, wait until you see the markets. Well, obviously, there are going to be fluctuations. The Dow Jones opened up to a 3% crash, the NASDAQ had a 5% drop, and the S&P 500 fell almost 4%, making it 10% down from its all-time high. With us seeing major banks and investment groups describing these tariffs as a worst-case scenario. And UBS predicting that they'll lead to slowing the US economy by 2 whole percentage points this year alone and raise inflation by 5%. But it looks like such a bad situation that strategists at the bank, they almost think it's just brinkmanship because it, quote, makes one's rational mind regard the possibility of them sticking as low. And this is others thinking that the market's dropping 10% from their all-time highs is just the start. With, for example, experts from Thornburg Investment Management saying markets may actually be underreacting, especially if these rates turn out to be final, given the potential knock-on effects to global consumption and trade. And you can actually look at the bond market to see how much investors appear to be worried. 10-year treasury bonds fell from 4.2% to 4.04% as of recording. And that's just the latest drop because back in January, they were sitting at almost 4.8%. And a big thing to keep in mind is this is a market where jumps like this are considered a massive, massive deal, especially when they're made in just 3 months, whereas normally it would take like half a year to see those results. Now with this, it may be possible for the government to offset some of these challenges by lowering interest rates, and it had actually been doing that late last year year before pausing in 2025. Or something that would allow companies and people to borrow way more money, which helps put cash into the economy. But of course, the potential drawback with that, as we saw during the COVID era, is that it can easily lead to big spikes in inflation since there's more money flowing around. And all of this it's not just like the markets. Everyday people are worried about things right now, with households reporting a 12-year low and how hopeful they are about their financial futures. But with that, just to avoid being a complete Debbie Downer, not every economic marker is bad news right now. Joblessness is down and remaining solid, and that trend could continue if Trump's plan to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US actually pans out. But also, I would say we are in a world of widespread uncertainty right now, especially because the tariffs, like we just saw, they are not a one-way street, right? While many were waiting for Trump's so-called Liberation Day, you had people worrying about the retaliation days, right? Everyone's waiting to see exactly how other countries are going to respond. And there, we saw the Chinese Commerce Ministry calling the tariffs unilateral bullying and promising to retaliate. But the Commerce Ministry spokesperson even accusing the US of violating international trade rules and saying the reciprocal tariffs, quote, seriously undermine the legitimate rights and interests of relevant parties. You then had the French Prime Minister calling the tariffs a catastrophe for the economic world and brutal and unfounded, while a government spokesperson said that, quote, we are also going to attack services. Right? And that makes up a majority of the US economy and means services from Google, Apple, Microsoft, all the big tech giants, they could be hit. And in fact, the French Prime Minister just called for all European companies to suspend their planned investments in the US, which we'll have to see what happens, but that could have an impact of billions and billions of dollars. Hell, just one French electrical equipment supplier promised $700 million to support US energy infrastructure to power the growth of AI just last month. And this, as the EU itself was also vague about an exact response right now, only threatening that if you take on one of us, you take on all of us. With the European Commission president promising what Bloomberg called firm and proportionate countermeasures, though we don't know yet what that's going to look like. Though all of this is other leaders weren't as confrontational, where the British Prime Minister seemed to say that negotiations for a different rate were ongoing. Though this, as the government also released a 400-plus page list of US goods that could be hit by retaliatory tariffs should they decide to strike back. Meanwhile, Japan called the rates regrettable, while India said it was carefully examining the implications of the various measures. Though notably, all of them dodged actually saying that they would retaliate. And so it's because of all of this uncertainty that we've seen figures like Mark Cuban, for example, suggesting it's not a bad idea to go to the local Walmart or big box retailer and buy lots of consumables now. From toothpaste to soap, anything you can find storage space for, buy before they have to replenish inventory. Saying even if it's made in the USA, they will jack up the price and blame it on tariffs. And all of this has even led to some congressional figures in Trump's own party worried that he's gone too far. With us seeing, for example, Senator Chuck Grassley announcing that he was sponsoring a bill that would claw back a lot of the tariff authority that Congress has given the president. With him saying in a statement, Congress has a constitutional role through the Commerce Clause on trade matters, and we should reassume that role. And this is the Democratic co-sponsor of the bill, Senator Maria Cantwell, added, arbitrary tariffs, particularly on our allies, damage U.S. export opportunities and raise prices for American consumers and businesses. As representatives of the American people, Congress has a duty to stop actions that will cause them harm. But notably, without widespread Republican support, a bill like this is going to be dead on arrival. So getting a Grassley on board, it's a good step to passing it. And in fact, we're now seeing reports that other leaders like Senator Tom Tillis are supporting the bill as well. Regarding if they are the first two of many or just two, that remains to be seen right now. For now, that is where we are, and we're gonna have to wait to see how this plays out over the coming days, weeks, and months. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.